Thank you, Google, and thank you, Pratik, for this opportunity to speak before this audience. So, I guess last week there has been a lot of talk about opinion polls, and surprisingly this time the exit polls were on the dot, almost. So, they kind of made up a little bit for the mess during the Brexit opinion polls. Well, as I said, I've been doing this for over about 2 decades in India, and I give talks on this, and during the talks or sometimes on the television show as well, people say, how can talking to 1200 voters tell you anything about what happens to the whole population? So 1200 I picked up, that's the typical size I saw of the polls in UK. In India, we usually have 5,000 to 6,000 for a state election and maybe even 20,000 for a national election, because we have a lot of diversity. But still, then the population is, or the number of voters is also 700 million, and this question still remains: how can talking to such a small proportion give you any insight into the whole population? Intuitively, everybody thinks about the proportion, sample size versus the population size, and the least one of the tasks of convincing you is that that's not important. That's one of the tasks. The other thing which I'll talk about, everybody has an opinion on that, but can opinion polls conducted say a week before the actual poll accurately predict the outcome? We saw here the recent poll, while the exit polls got it right, even 1 week earlier they were still saying a comfortable victory for Conservatives. So there are occasions when they can and there are occasions when they will not. So we'll talk about that. Of course, the whole thing is as a probability statistics background, and this slide deliberately I have kept it blank. It doesn't mean no background needed, but we'll do it live, what background is needed. So what I have with me is just a cardboard box, and what it has are 100 slips of paper, okay, identical in all aspects, and each one has a letter written on it, either A or a B. So you trust me on that, and then I mix them thoroughly and come to the audience, and someone whom I have never met before, I ask you to pick up one. You can pick from the top, bottom, anywhere.
Okay.
All right. Can you read out and A. So you believe that we have not fixed this event, and one was drawn out of this box after mixing, and that one read an A. Now, it's just based on this information. If you were to make a call, oh, I forgot to say that there are 99 of them which have one letter and exactly one which is the outlier. Okay, so either we have only 2 possibilities: 99 A's and 1 B, or 99 B's and 1 A. Just based on this observation that it was one was drawn out after mixing, etc., and that was a A. If you have to make a guess between the 2 possibilities, which is the likely possibility? 99A and 1B or 99B and 1A? 99A. So few people answered, others may have made up their mind but didn't answer. But if one tries to go at the background as to what went in your mind when you picked this alternative, of course the simplest explanation is just common sense, what is there. Okay. People who have had some statistics background or probability background may compute probabilities of the 2 scenarios and compare. They have even sold on the Bayesian philosophy. They would compute put a prior and compute a posterior, and say that the posterior probability of getting it this right is 99%. So they will go with the whichever one turned up is your answer, right? So now let's do a thought experiment. I don't have another box, but let's do a thought experiment that instead of 99.1 we had 95.5. Okay, so one letter is 95, another letter is 5, and they are all mixed up. And let's say I go to one person, you draw out, read it out, put it back, we shake it up again, I come to the second, I come to the third. This time you will have 3 observations, okay, and we can still go, they all could be same, or we could have 2 of one and 1 of the other. That's why I didn't pick from 1 to 2, but 3. There's no ties. Okay, So, we can talk about go with the majority rule with 3. Okay. And here is a slide which would convince us that the chances of, in the certain loose sense, chances of getting it right are again over 99%. So, the first one is all 3 are the same, or 2 are of the dominant one and 1 is the outlier. Okay. So, that is the possibilities, and so by repeating the draws, 3 draws, we have increased our precision. In a loose sense, precision earlier was 99%, now if you draw once it is 95, by 3 draws we have improved the precision to 99%. And thus we can still go with this kind of a rule, go with the majority out of 3. Now, if the gap is lesser, we can experiment and come up with what number is needed to reach 99% precision. Okay. And we'll I'll display the numbers, what kind of scaling up happens. Okay. But let's do another thought experiment. Instead of 100 slips, we had a bigger box and had 1000 slips. Okay. And once again 95% with one letter and 5% the other one. So, 95 have one letter, 95% have one letter, 5% has the other. So, 950 and 50. So, total 1000, 950, 50 is the breakup, and this time again we want to get an accuracy level of 99%. So, with 100 and 95.5 we saw it was 3 draws. So, how would it scale up? Do we need 3 draws or do we need 30? So, does it scale up like multiplier or does it scale up like square root, as some various things in statistics scale up? What is the factor of scale up is the question. The answer to this is rather counterintuitive. Just look at these 2 equations. First one was for 100 slips with 95.5, second one is for 1000 slips with 950 and 50. And of course, the second one there is just a factor of 10 in each factor in each term, and they would cancel out. So, with even if we had 1000 slips with 950-50 distribution, if we draw 3 and go with the majority, our accuracy level is still over 99%, precision is still over 99% and more. Indeed, it scales up. It could be anything. Instead of 1000, it could have been 100,000, it could have been 1,000,000, whatever. If the distribution is 95% and 5%, we draw 3, go with the majority, precision is 99. So, this is somewhat counterintuitive, that it is the number of draws and not total how many slips, okay, that decides the precision. So, just written an equation, we do not have to read that, but if you have if we write down that W is the support for winner, I am just saying a 2-party contest, one constituency, we do not even need to know the constituency size, and 2 candidates, W% support for the winner and 100 minus W for the loser. Okay. We draw an odd number of draws, and accuracy of the rule, go with the winner in the sample, is this expression. Interesting thing, this expression does not require population size or the size of the constituency, number of voters in the constituency. And this is what is at the back of people, when that the population size should somehow enter the picture when you want precision. That is why they say that, why so many, just so many out of so many, how can you say anything? Okay. So, as I said, counterintuitive but true. Now, here is this table which I have computed. That expression on the previous slide I have just computed explicitly for so the column header is number of draws, spelling mistake. So, column header is the number of draws, and the row header is the percentage of support for the winner. So 51 is like very touch and go, very close election, and 53, 54 is a comfortable election. So when it is comfortable, even 54%, even 1001, so this time equivalent of draw is going to voters and seeking their opinion. So if it's a comfortable victory margin, then even going to 1000 people and getting their opinion should give you an insight into what is likely to happen. 99.4% accuracy. Exactly same logic as with the experiment of drawing one slip, nothing more, nothing less. In fact, we can imagine that we write out slips with all possible lists of 1000 voters from that constituency, put them in a box, shake it up and take it out. We don't have to do it as a thought experiment. That's exactly what it is. And even 52%, 5248, even 2501 size should suffice to get good precision. So so another way of putting it is whether I am going to do a poll in UK or in India, where India the voters are at least 10 times more, if not 12 times more. For a given precision, I need the same sample size. Something which is very difficult to sell to media houses. I mean, we do it for media houses in India, and we do it for the whole country as well as for individual states. And they would say, for the whole country we had so much budget, now this state is less than a tenth of the whole population, our budget slashed by 10%. Slash to 10%, and we have to tell them no. I mean, of course they are not going to buy this math. So that's a tough task. But okay, one correction in a sense that while in this experiment I could take, when we are drawing 3, we will draw one slip, we put it back, shake it up again, go to the second person, put it back, shake, and so on. So this is with replacement. So once you have taken it out, you have replaced it. In practice, you are never going to do that. You can't be going to the same person saying, oh, your name appears twice in my sample, so I'll ask you 2 times, whether face to face or by phone. That's stupid. So in practice, what is implemented is what is called sampling without replacement. So you take out one slip, keep it aside, and then go to the next and take it out of that. It makes very little difference. If anything, it only improves this table. This accuracy of prediction, if you do without replacement, if anything, it only improves. As we can see, if the total population was only 2501 and we do without replacement, then at 2501 we will get the exact answer no matter what is the proportion. So if the sample is a much larger proportion of the population, then the numbers change, but only upwards. And when the sample is like 1% or less, then these are the numbers, even in practice. So this is less someone challenges me that it does make a difference, the population size. It makes a difference in practice because we do without replacement, and even then when the samples collected is less than 1% of the population, this is the table. Okay, so the crux then is how do we select this 1001 or 2501 respondents. So what we do should correspond to, in some sense, writing out all possible lists of that size, putting it in a big box, shaking it up, and then drawing one. Okay. If we don't do that, we may not get the right answer. Okay. So for example, if we were to pick, say, 1000 people in last week, we had to do something about London city itself, not all of UK, but how are the voters in London doing. Okay. If someone says, okay, I'll just come and stand at Google office in 6 PS office, and first 1000 people who enter, I'll just get their opinion. Okay. Got a sample of size 1000, would that do? And even a little thought would tell you that that won't do. I mean, it's what would be a very, very biased sample of a certain socio-economic profile, age group and socio-economic profile. everybody has something to do with Google. Most of them would be employees and few could be visitors, but they have something to do with Google, and that already tells you a certain socio-economic class, and this won't represent the opinion of the entire city of London. So, how do we select these 1,000 people is the crux of this whole methodology or technology, and part of the problem happens is that in colloquial terms people equate the word random with arbitrary, and if you say no, we don't, well, what is RAM in our computer systems? Random access memory. It is mistakenly called, it should actually be called arbitrary access memory. That was to differentiate it from linear access memory as in old magnetic tapes, where you could only access it linearly. They came up with this new thing where you could address any, you could ask any address. So, so it is actually arbitrary access memory, but it's got used to be random access memory, and now of course we only call it RAM, we don't call it random. So this is just an example to say that how these two things are confused in somehow in general public's mind. That, so that's why the thing comes, just catch some 1,000 people, no, not some 1,000 people. Sometimes when I say this, others argue with me, well, the first 1,000 people to enter Google could be on one of the lists. If you make all possible lists, this would be one of the lists. So how can you say this is not random sample? Well, the answer to that is random or not is not a property of the group chosen, it is the property of the method by which you chose. If you tell me this group, I can't say that no, this is not random, because I don't know how you have chosen it. If you tell me how you have chosen it, then I can make a verdict whether or not it's a randomly chosen subset. So, so especially on television, a lot of fireworks with especially from the representatives of the parties whom we are saying are going to lose are based on just this approach, that either sample size and this random sample. So, the point is random sampling is a must if you do it. Now, so I call it, it's a must if for the statistical guarantee that the sample based prediction is accurate. The choice of the sample should have been chosen randomly. Then, now one could have some shortcuts, or one could make additional requirements. For example, if you know that there is a rural urban divide, or if you know that there is a divide across economic strata, then if we have a master database where we can where we have data about age groups or about income levels, education, so one can create subgroups, and that are what are called stratas in statistics, and for each strata we can pick then randomly the required number of, but at the, so we can have a smarter strategies to get a better representation, but final stage we have to have random choice in a certain way done, either just to a random number, you have a list and you generate randomly numbers and you pick those, that's easiest thing to do now. You don't have to make slips and put them in a box and so on and so forth. The implementing it varies from place to place, what is possible, what is not possible. So, in UK I understand, and probably and US also, typically these days it is done through a telephone survey. You randomly generate telephone numbers and you call up people and get their opinion. Now, this methodology is fine now in the Western world. Even in the Western world, going back few decades, this was not fine because the penetration of telephones was not quite universal. In India, this is still not okay because the penetration in the lower sections of the society, socio-economic classes, is still rather poor. So anything done through telephone surveys is not going to represent the entire population. Now, especially here people could say that why go through this thing of calling up people and so on and so forth. People are voluntarily pumping away at a fast pace on social media. Just pick that data and use that. After all, advertisers have gone away from doing market research in the traditional way of sampling, but are going with the social media buzz. Why not elections? Is a very valid question. The answer to that is, for elections it won't do, while for advertising, for several products it does work, because if you are trying to address a market, and that market consists of people who are active on social media. Let's say somebody is advertising, for a phone company is advertising a very good deal for Wi-Fi connectivity while on the move on the mobile. Well, they are only targeting this segment. So for them it's enough to get the social media buzz. But in an election scenario, there is a differential usage across socio-economic classes, and if one goes by social media, one is likely to make errors. So we had 3 years ago in one of the high profile elections in India, we had looked at opinion poll based thing as well as the social media buzz. We would have picked the winner correctly based on social media buzz, and the ultimate answer was a hands down victory, but we would have got a much bigger victory margin if we had gone with social media. There was total buzz on one side. So the maybe over time one could do this, but certainly even in the Western world, I don't think they can take this as one of the inputs in their model, but they can't entirely go with social media buzz. That will drive them away. So now let me come to another very interesting question. All the surveys can do is to get estimate of vote percentage. What percentage of people here were voting for Labour and what were voting for the Tories, and for the rest, the smaller parties. But there is no magical formula which you can input the vote percentages for the parties and the output would give you how many seats, because a lot depends on how these votes are distributed. So just measuring the total votes is not good enough. On the other hand, if for every constituency you measure votes, then that is good enough, but then that's an impossible exercise. Too expensive, too time consuming, and almost not doable. There are over 600 constituencies. On each one, if you wanted 1,000, that's a tough task. Nobody would pay for that kind of a thing. So that's not possible. So what do we do? On one hand, statistically you can measure public opinion in terms of overall vote percentages, but the interest for everyone, it doesn't help if I say, no, my vote estimate was right, but the seats were wrong. What can I do? People will not listen to me and conclude I am wrong. Also the other way, if somehow I make two errors cancel each other out, our survey is wrong and my conversion is also wrong, and eventually we get right. Every public eye, I have got it right, because that is the objective function we are looking at, seats. Even in US, it's the electoral college votes, not quite the votes, but in a system like UK, it is winner take all at a constituency level. Whoever gets the largest number of votes gets that constituency's representative is their party. In US, the consolidation happens at a state level, winner take all at a state level. Even if in the state the one candidate is ahead of the other with just a few hundred votes, but they get the entire state's quota of electoral college votes. That's the system in US. And to do this, namely convert votes to seats, what we need is a kind of a mathematical statistical model which would as an input take into account various things that we know about the ground realities. The things like how susceptible is the vote for change, that is, or the volatility of public opinion. Now traditionally I had been hearing and had been told, I used to interact quite a bit with one Professor Clive Payne, who used to do, who was a psephologist for BBC for a long period, a professor in the Field College. And he had told me that the volatility of public opinion in UK is very small. From one election, if you look at from one election to the next, how many people change their vote, that's very small. Now that scenario, it looks like has been changing. Just tracking the opinion polls over last 3 weeks 3 weeks ago they had measured the gap between Conservatives and Labour to be over 20%, and it came down to 2% or 1% when it came to the election time. So the traditionally they used to spend to put a lot of effort on what they call the marginal seats and what was called safe seats, safe for predicting, where the last time the gap was 7% or more. Well, you can count this, whoever won last time will win again. This time a lot of such seats have changed hands. So the model should take into account all such things that one knows about the wherever one is making the prediction. Other thing is what kind of data is available. One knows that socio-economic profile does matter when one for voting intention overall, and one should balance across that, but at what level is such profiles available? So in UK they are available at a fairly detailed level, in perhaps at precinct level. In India they are not available at that level, because it's available at district level in India but not at the vote constituency level. So taking into account various such realities, how susceptible is the vote for change, what kind of other data, auxiliary data is available, taking into account all that, one builds a statistical model and then uses that to convert votes to seats. And so this is where I come in actually in our team in India, where we do it. That the others do the actual sampling and so on and so forth, and I come into the picture for this vote to seat conversion. So indeed, if one looks at the last US election, everybody got it wrong, but they got it wrong for, it was not the survey which got it wrong, it was this vote to seat conversion where they got it wrong. Hillary Clinton did get more votes than Trump, and toward then they had been calling that the gap has narrowed, but there was still, everybody was gung-ho about Hillary winning. And what went wrong was what in statistics would call their prior. So like I talked about UK, in US too they have classified the states into 3 groups, Democratic, Republican and swing states or marginal states, and their entire effort was in looking at what is happening in the marginal states. They had classified, okay, these 20 or this 17 go in the Democratic basket, this 12 go in the Republican basket, and then now let's focus on the rest. It was this classification which went wrong. 3 of their Democratic states, I guess Michigan, Wisconsin and one more, which everybody believed cannot go out of Democrats, and they changed sides by narrow margin, and if they had not changed side, Hillary would have been president. So that's the other thing, how much weight do you give on your prior and how much weight do you give on your data in any statistical thing. So prior, model, all that is together, and then the data. Only data will not do, because you need some other information, and it's so it's not just a science, it's a science and an art. You have to take a right mix. So now, are people willing to answer questions? So I'm told that increasingly in the UK, US, the answer is no. Only about 10% of phone calls that they make end up them getting the answers they want. Most others just hang up as soon as they hear okay, I know, and they'll put it down. Interestingly, in India, where we do not do phone survey, but actually do door-to-door survey, a lot more expensive, but then refusal rate is very small, only about 8 to 9%. If you can find the person, people are willing to talk. So telephone survey is much cheaper, but then there is this huge refusal rate, and then there are lots of questions about, is there a systematic bias in being introduced in refusal and non-refusal? Is it people who have nothing else to do willing to answer, and people who are otherwise have some meaningful stuff to do are refusing to answer, right? So these are questions, but even when people are willing to answer face to face, all the more so, they are very happy to answer if we ask questions about how is the PM doing, or was this policy right, what that policy right. Everybody has an opinion and can give a lecture, not just answer of yes, no. But at the end, if you ask, okay, so whom are you going to vote tomorrow or next week? Answer is not going to, why should I tell you? right? Because that's considered private information. Also, they don't know how you might use it. So what we do is we carry a box something like this, a bigger one with a slit. It's like we simulate an old style ballot box with a slit, and all other questions are answered face to face. This question, whom are you going to vote, voting intention, we give them a slip of paper with the names. You mark it, put it in a, go away, mark it, bring it back, fold it, put it in here. People are willing to do that. So there is also what is acceptable to people. So it's a mix of various such things, understanding ground realities, psychology of the population, all that goes into planning and doing this survey. Next is do people tell truth? And this is where there is a lot of debate. In fact, some people who do surveys believe that in any case, people either may not answer the direct question, whom are you going to vote, or even when they answer, it may be unreliable. So then what they do is, they impute a vote based on answers to other questions. For example, in UK, this election they could have had, are you in favor of Brexit or not? That could have been one of the questions, plus various other questions, so 10 questions. And based on that answer, you build a model to decide whether this respondent is likely to vote Labour or likely to vote Conservative. So that's one approach. In India, with a much larger proportion being illiterate, this approach is unlikely to work. We have tried to experiment with, we do ask questions and we do ask a direct question and then try to correlate and try to see if some patterns we can find. No, it's not going to work there. It might be working in the West. So not everybody follows this imputing methodology, but there are serious researchers, survey researchers who do this, that they ask 10 questions, 12 questions and impute a vote based on that. So my actual experience with data is only limited to India. It's not, for UK my interaction was limited to interactions with Professor Clive Payne. That was also nearly 18 years ago. So another technique which is used by some researchers is using last vote recall to correct for bias. So along with other questions, you also ask, okay, how did you vote last time there were the elections? So and the idea is that if you see that, let's say in your sample, you are overestimating Conservative vote by 3% for the last vote recall, that means in spite of whatever you have tried, you have somehow got a biased sample and you correct for the same by applying this correction. So you scale down the Conservative vote by corresponding percentages, additive or multiplicative, you can do that, and scale up the Labour vote. So this is one common technique used by researchers. And once again, in India, when we try to do this, we are driven far away from the reality. And again, something to do with psychology. So there seems to be a tendency in India to identify with the winner. So so even when they are very unhappy with the government and are voting it out, much larger proportion of people seem to remember that, yeah, I don't want them now, but 5 years ago I voted for them. So we have found this invariant of space and time. Whoever was the winner last time seems to have much larger recall in vote. And so we do not do that. So again, it is to do with understanding the psychology of the nation to which one is doing this. How do people behave collectively? So I have a favorite phrase which I use. So electrons spin the same way in India as they do in London, but human minds, one can't say the same. So anything which is a physical phenomena, one could use a model vetted in the West, just implant it in there and it will work. But when the phenomena involves public interaction, human choices being made by humans, that could at best be a starting point and one needs to fine tune the model. So, okay, the last one, as we saw in UK itself recently, that predictive power of a poll done weeks ahead was not much good. They used probably similar methodology and exit polls, they came out with the right numbers. And so when there is a shifting opinion, clearly, an opinion poll can at best tell you what is the mood of the nation at the time the vote is taken. It cannot predict how it might evolve in the last week. So in a fluid situation where the public opinion is changing, you can't quite trust a poll done ahead. There's another factor which probably played an important role in UK in recent one. The poll done a week ahead or month ahead invariably of the whole population. Now the pollsters could use their assumption, okay, this is the overall group, this group is unlikely to go and vote, only 60% of this group go and vote. This group 80% go and vote, apply those factors and then take it together. Okay? But that's only a guesswork, and presumably they may have done that in UK in the pre-election polls, and this time again reading newspaper reports, I have no other input, younger voters turned up is much larger proportion this time around than they were traditionally voting. And that could explain that in the exit poll they don't need to apply such imputed percentage of votes, they actually sample from the people who have come to vote, and they therefore caught this effect of younger people turning up in larger proportion than ever before, and that's how they got a better result. So the predictive power of poll is a question mark on two counts. One, the opinion itself may be changing, and two, at best you could be making a guesswork about who is going to turn up to vote, you don't really know who is going to vote. So that is what raises a question mark. So I guess let me stop and questions.
So you were saying, please wait for the mic. So you were saying that in India polling through telephone doesn't work, whereas in UK that tends to work. But I was wondering, in UK I think a lot of young people are not really using home telephones these days.
Yeah.
So they're using mostly mobile phones, and a lot of my friends don't have them. So
yeah.
Do you think that is representative?
Yeah, so I suppose I don't know what they are doing, but perhaps they are trying to somehow factoring this into account in their polling method, and maybe also calling mobile numbers. I really don't know what they are doing. But yes, if they only stick to landline numbers, they are going to miss out the younger group completely. So point very well taken.
Have you looked into the question of whether making the opinion polls public can actually influence the result through like tactical voting?
Yeah. Okay. So at least based on India experience, I do believe that there is a feedback loop, and it does impact tactical voting. And again, it is to do with this, what I call the psychology of going with the winner. So whoever the media is saying is winning ends up actually increasing the gap typically. So that's indirect evidence that it does have a feedback loop. But so people ask me, then why are you associated with it? But well, others are going, whether I do it or not, others are going to do it in any way. So it's good proper methodological poll is done and released. That's my answer to that, yes. But it does have a feedback loop. I don't know again, Wes, what is the belief?
So what capability does a company like Facebook have to address this problem? Because my understanding is, they gather so much data on their users, and they actually have a very good understanding of the political preferences of most of them. So is a company like Facebook actually in a position just to kind of replace sample polling?
Maybe over time, when then it becomes more universal. But at this point, I think not, because it can capture the opinion of the users that it has had. But the lower socioeconomic strata, who even though they may be using a mobile, they may not be on Facebook, that group will be completely missed. So I think, as I said, if you are using this for marketing some product which anyway is addressing that segment, great, that's big information. But for something like elections, perhaps one has to wait. Maybe another few decades and it might become almost universal, then maybe. Or not Facebook, something else may come up, but social media more generally.
So my question is about the sample size dependence on on the percentages. So as you said that it is relatively independent, sample size you need for the given prediction accuracy is independent of the total population size. But I'm sure that it depends a bit more strongly on the number of choices. So like number of possibilities. So not binomial but multinomial.
Actually no, even that it doesn't depend. What it depends a lot on, for the country as a whole, it depends on how much is the diversity as a whole.
Right. So are you saying that, for example, if there was not just 2 parties, but like in India, like let's say 30 parties, right? So the choice that you have to make is between which of these 30 parties is going to win. So you're saying that the size that I need does not actually depend on whether there's 30 or 300.
No.
That seems more counterintuitive for me.
But for vote to seat conversion, is a homogeneous country, or is it? So in India, for example, each state has a kind of a different political structure, and so we don't treat the country as a whole. For predicting, we look at each state, at least the largest state as a whole, and so I need a reasonable sample size at that state level, because how people in the deep south Tamil Nadu vote has nothing to do with what people in the east in Bengal are thinking. So complete disconnect, at least politically, and therefore. So in that sense, I do need to do a poll at each state. Not just getting a nationwide thing might give me vote percentage, but it will not tell me at all for my vote to seat conversion. So for vote to seat conversion, I do need a larger. But number of parties doesn't mess up too much.
There must be a dependence. Sorry.
Yeah.
So because if you consider the limiting case of the number of choices being actually larger than the population size, right?
Okay.
Now then there is the pigeonhole principle will say basically that you actually need to poll everybody.
So when I said doesn't depend, we are still talking in terms of
small
between
fractions.
2 and 100. We are not talking of million choices.
Yes, exactly.
And to answer your question once again, to get vote estimate it doesn't change, but from vote to seat, if it's a direct contest it's much easier. When it's a 3-way contest neck to neck, it's much more difficult. Okay. So
how does these models consider turnout of the different groups of voters? Since if you poll people, many of them will not actually vote.
So that is based on anecdotal or historical evidence.
So basically, for example, if you say that most of young people will vote Labour, and also you have data that many young voters actually don't vote, can you decrease the prediction for Labour, for instance?
So that's what is done. So you have your prior information, belief, whatever you call it, about voting in propensity to vote across different socioeconomic groups, and you scale it up or down based on that, from what you get from the survey.
Do people ever try and do adaptive sampling in some sense? So if you think that you have a certain prior belief that, say, people in Scotland always vote for one party, and then you start sampling them and you find that actually they don't anymore, would people have a second round of sampling where they
I mean, ideally that would be good to do, but the time constraint comes in, because typically you would like to do it as close as possible to the publication date or telecast time, and you may not have enough time to take in all this information and change sample sizes. But if you do see something very different from what you had expected, then a second round of poll is indeed would add value. So in that sense, adaptive thing is desirable, but maybe not always doable.
I was wondering, sorry to follow up on that, if you do a blended thing, because you were talking about like there's different methods of sampling and some are more expensive than others, and if you ask people on Twitter who they'd vote for, and if that's any different to phone polls versus like knocking on doors versus, other even more expensive approaches, like do you sort of blend them together? Is that an approach?
Well, I have not done so till now, because the the group which is on Twitter, Facebook and such in India is very small proportion of the overall thing. So even if I want to blend that in, I would have to give it a very tiny weight. So that's why we have not done it. But I guess another 10 years later, I'm sure we'll be forced to do that. Here they may be doing it, okay, here on US, because another thing which is said is that it's also opinion makers. So somebody is on the Facebook and is giving his or her opinion. If they are able to influence, let's say, their people whom they come in touch with, okay. So these are influence makers. So typically these people, so each one may be influencing a few others' choices. So therefore that should be taken into account is what one group is advocates. So over time, I'm sure it will be needed to be factored in.
Hi, could you talk a little bit about people's motivations for actually wanting poll data? Because one obvious example is, it's a political party or a lobbyist who's trying to actually influence the result, and therefore they're probably interested in, what are the marginal seats? Am I very vulnerable to, let's say, the youth vote and slight fluctuations in the youth vote in this constituency? In which case, they're not just going to be interested in your final answer, your final prediction, but also some of the variables that went into it and what influence they have and where they should be focusing their attention. I mean, do the people who are commissioning your polls, are they interested in that type of information, or do they have other motivations?
Well, I'm sure there are others motivated polls which want such information, but the ones with whom I am associated with is purely a media poll, and it is carried out by a group of people who are social scientists, and they are interested in doing it because this is valuable data for their own research in getting insight into why people vote the way they did, what were the reasons driving the vote. So months after our television program is over, these guys would be combing the data and coming to more deeper answers to these questions. So, but I'm sure political parties do get polling done on this basis by other agencies.
In cases where the opinions are very close or is changing, then polls seems to be, like you suggested earlier, that they seem to be less accurate.
Yeah.
Apart from the solution of not doing polling and just ignoring all the polling data, what would you suggest kind of pollsters kind of do in the future to improve? What are we not doing today that we should be doing, a year from now when we detect that there is a mood change, in the general population?
Well, a lot depends on what money is available to do the poll. Okay. Yeah. No, for the opinion poll. Okay. So one thing could be to ask not just the sample size, but even the questionnaire could be adapted. If we are tracking the same people, and if you today say something different from what you said 1 week ago, then the questions I should ask you should be more probing. What happened during this week? So everybody based on newspaper reports or media reports would know 5 big events which happened. So then we should drill down into which of these influenced your change. Okay? Things like that can be done, but it requires a lot more money. So let me make 1 or 2 more comments. Other than media these days, the other interest in opinion polls is the financial markets. So if you read the evening tabloids the day before the polling, they were giving various scenarios and how will the market react. And so the market players are very much interested in, because finally the election outcome does impact the market. So they are very much interested in anticipating this. And in India I have seen financial groups commissioning survey or trying to get us to come and talk to them and get better insight into what is happening. I'm sure it is happening here too. So over time, more than the media, it could be the financial markets which would be engaging pollsters, perhaps.
I have a bit of a question about the use of opinion polls to influence the outcome of elections, and whether there have been any examples of political parties trying to introduce biased opinion polls or introduce bias into the sampling methods or anything like that to try and sort of shift the election in their direction, and if that sort of thing does or could happen, what there might be to protect against that.
Yeah. So in India, I mean, I won't say that there is evidence, but there is enough circumstantial evidence that this kind of things have happened. And all I can say is that we had not been approached, and even with the media house for whom we were doing the polls, we had a very clear understanding, contract, that they cannot influence what we will say. After commissioning poll, they can refuse to put us on air, that is their prerogative. But if they put us on air, we will only say what our survey is saying, even if it is wrong. But in fact, in India, 2 years ago, before this high-profile election, there was a sting operation. Somebody posing as and acting on behalf of certain political parties went and talked to 10 different agencies and trying to indirectly say that what if we want to fine-tune your findings in a certain way, and 7 out of the 10 did indicate that it may cost, but it is possible we can debate and discuss such things. They were caught on camera. So
in the US, there was a newspaper who did a completely different approach. They had like a group of 100 or 100 fixed people, of which they asked the opinion, and based on that they did inferences on what they believed the election results would be. What is your opinion on such an approach instead of random sampling?
I would say I won't go with that. I mean, they may be right on occasions, but there's no reason why these 100 people alone would determine what is the entire mood in the nation, right? I mean, and you change that 100 to 1,000, doesn't change. Of course, the television rating system, TRP system, is everywhere based on such an approach. Okay, but it's debated. The question is, what else can they do? But in an opinion poll, having a fixed sample to track, I think would have a limited value, but one will have to see how their predictions evolve over time. Ultimately, that's the only measure, overall thing.
Any more questions? If there are no questions anymore, then please thank our guest. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.